Two starving peasant children begged the Duke for mercy, and in front of the entire court, he instantly burst into tears. The great hall falls silent. Nobles freeze, wine cups trembling, as the mightiest man in the land drops to his knees before two barefoot beggars. A single tear rolls down his cheek, and the torches flicker like the world has shifted. But mercy in a castle is dangerous. Behind jeweled fans, whispers turn to daggers. A powerful rival seizes her chance, vowing to tear down the Duke's honor and expose the servant girl who dared to help the children. What secret binds these orphans to the Duke's broken heart? And when mercy is treated as weakness, will it destroy his throne or save his soul? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The great hall of Falkenrath Castle blazed with the light of 100 beeswax candles, their golden glow reflecting off polished silver and crystal goblets. Sweet-scented smoke from the burning wax mingled with the rich aromas of roasted venison, herb-stuffed pheasant, and expensive imported wines. The vaulted ceiling echoed with the gentle strains of viols and lutes as musicians played from their gallery above. Anna Muller slipped through the servants' door, carrying a fresh stack of trenchers, the thick bread plates used by the nobility. Her plain brown dress and white apron marked her as a kitchen maid, nearly invisible to the finely dressed lords and ladies who sat at the long tables. Still, she couldn't help stealing glances at the magnificent scene before her. Ladies in silk gowns of emerald, sapphire, and ruby gossiped behind jeweled fans. Their elaborate hairstyles sparkled with pearls and silver pins. Gentlemen in velvet coats and embroidered waistcoats raised crystal goblets in toast after toast, their voices growing louder with each glass of wine. At the head table, elevated on its dais, sat Duke Leopold von Falkenrath himself. His broad shoulders were wrapped in black velvet, silver buttons gleaming down his chest. Unlike his merry guests, the Duke sat rigid and stern, barely touching the delicacies before him. His sharp gray eyes surveyed the feast with distance, as if the laughter and music were sounds from another world entirely. "Have you seen him smile even once this evening?" whispered a young noblewoman to her companion, her voice carrying just far enough for Anna to hear as she distributed fresh trenchers. "The Duke? I haven't seen him smile in years. Not since." The lady's voice dropped even lower. "Not since the tragedy." Anna knew what they meant. Everyone in the castle knew about the Duke's daughter, taken by fever 3 years past. Since then, their master had become like ice, cold, hard, and unyielding. "He's more statue than man these days," added a portly baron, dabbing wine from his mustache. "Running the estate like a military campaign. No mercy, no warmth, just rules and duties and proper forms of address." As if sensing their gossip, the Duke's stern gaze swept across the hall. The whispering nobles quickly turned their attention back to their plates. Anna hurried to gather empty trenchers, keeping her eyes lowered as proper for a servant. The steady rhythm of the feast continued. Courses brought forth, wines poured, plates cleared away. Greta, the kitchen matron, appeared at Anna's elbow with more instructions. Her round face flushed from the heat of the ovens below. "Mind you keep the Duke's goblet filled," she muttered. "He's in one of his moods tonight, and we don't need him finding fault with the service." Anna nodded, though her heart ached at how they all tiptoed around their master's grief. She had seen moments, brief flashes, when his stern mask slipped, times when he paused in the garden where his daughter used to play, or when he found one of her forgotten toys in some dusty corner. The musicians began a lively pavane, and several couples rose to dance. The candlelight caught the swish of silk skirts and the flash of jeweled sword hilts as the nobles moved through the stately steps. The pleasant atmosphere was suddenly broken by a commotion at the great doors. Two small figures slipped past the startled guards, children, their clothing little more than rags, their faces smudged with dirt but their eyes bright with desperation. Anna's heart stopped. She recognized them instantly, Hans and Liesel, from the village. The same children she had secretly shown how to find the castle's kitchen gate when she saw them scrounging for scraps in the market that morning. The boy, Hans, kept one protective arm around his smaller sister as they approached the Duke's table. Their bare feet left dusty prints on the polished floor. The entire hall fell silent, the musician's notes trailing away into nothing. "Please, Your Grace," Hans said, his voice trembling but clear. "We beg for bread. Our father is dead. Our mother's sick. We haven't eaten in 2 days." Little Liesel, barely 6 years old, clutched her brother's ragged sleeve. Her eyes grew wide at the sight of so much food, but she remembered her manners and dropped into a wobbly curtsy. The silence in the hall grew thicker. Anna held her breath, her hands clasped tight around an empty trencher. The Duke slowly rose from his chair, his face carved from stone. Every eye in the room fixed upon him, waiting for his reaction to this unprecedented breach of protocol. Then, something extraordinary happened. As the Duke looked down at the 2 ragged children, his stern expression began to crack. His lips trembled. To everyone's astonishment, tears welled in his eyes and spilled down his cheeks. The nobles gasped. Ladies behind their fans whispered in shock. Never had anyone seen the Duke show such emotion, not even at his daughter's funeral. He stood there, this powerful man who ruled over vast estates, weeping openly before his assembled court. The Duke raised one shaking hand to his face, wiping at the tears. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but carried clearly through the silent hall. "Bring my plate to these children," he commanded. "Let them eat their fill." Servants scrambled to obey. Anna watched as Hans and Liesel were seated at a small table, the Duke's own golden plate placed before them. The children stared in wonder at the rich food: tender venison, roasted fowl, white bread, and sweet pastries. The hall erupted in whispers. Nobles leaned close together, their jewels glinting as they shared amazed observations. The Duke's reputation for coldness, his years of stern reserve, all shattered by the sight of 2 hungry children. "Did you see? Actually weeping. Perhaps he's not made of ice after all. Those poor little ones, they look just about the age his daughter would be now." Anna felt her own eyes grow moist as she watched Hans carefully cutting small pieces of meat for his sister. Relief flooded through her. The children would eat tonight, would not go to bed hungry. But that relief was quickly followed by dread, coiling cold in her stomach. She had been the one to show them the way. Against all rules, she had told 2 peasant children how to find the kitchen gate, hoping they might beg scraps from the cook. She never imagined they would dare enter the great hall itself. If anyone discovered her part in this. The Duke remained standing, his tears now dried, but his usual mask of stern authority changed into something softer, more human. He watched the children eat with an expression Anna had never seen before, a mixture of pain and tenderness that transformed his entire face. Greta appeared at Anna's side, pinching her arm. "Back to work, girl," she whispered. "Though heaven help us all when he discovers who helped those little ones find their way in." Anna nodded, gathering empty plates with trembling hands. She whispered a prayer of thanks, that the children would be fed, tonight. And another for mercy should her role be discovered. As she slipped back toward the kitchen, she cast one last glance at the Duke. He had resumed his seat but kept his eyes on Hans and Liesel, watching them eat with an expression that mixed grief with something that looked almost like awakening hope. The musicians slowly resumed their playing, though more softly now. The feast continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Something had cracked in the great hall of Falkenrath Castle, the Duke's stern facade, the normal barriers between noble and peasant, the expected order of things. Anna didn't know what would come of it all, but as she hurried back to her duties in the kitchen, she felt that somehow, in some way, everything had changed. The great hall hummed with whispers as Hans and Liesel devoured the fine food from the Duke's own plate. Anna watched from the doorway as the little boy carefully cut each morsel into smaller pieces for his sister, his own hunger forgotten in his care for her. Liesel's eyes grew wide at the taste of roasted pheasant, so different from the hard bread crusts they usually scraped together. "Poor lambs," whispered a noblewoman behind her jeweled fan. "Look how they eat, as if they fear the food might vanish." "But such a shocking display," her companion replied. pearls gleaming at her throat. The Duke, weeping before the entire court. Whatever has come over him. Anna slipped away from the murmuring nobles, hurrying back to the kitchen where chaos reigned. Servants rushed about, their faces flushed with excitement as they debated the unprecedented events upstairs. The kitchen's warm air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and fresh-baked bread, but also with speculation and fear. "Mad, I tell you," declared one of the footmen, polishing a silver tray with more vigor than necessary. The Duke's finally lost his mind with grief. First tears, then feeding peasants at his own table. What next? "Hush your mouth, Greta," scolded, her broad face red from the cooking fires. It's not for us to judge the master's actions. But even she looked worried as she kneaded dough with unusual force. "It's mercy, plain and simple," argued a young scullery maid. "Those poor children, thin as winter twigs. Any person with a heart would—" "Any person, yes," interrupted an older servant. "But he's the Duke. He can't afford to show such weakness, not with the vultures circling." Anna kept her head down, focusing on arranging fresh trenchers. Her hands trembled slightly as guilt and worry churned in her stomach. If anyone discovered she had helped the children find their way in. Above, the musicians played on, but a new tension had settled over the feast. Anna carried fresh plates up to the great hall, careful to keep her expression neutral as she passed among the whispering nobles. The Duke had excused himself, his chair conspicuously empty at the high table. Through the servants' passages, Anna caught glimpses of him in the withdrawing room, a private chamber where nobles could retreat from the feast's chaos. He stood alone by the window, his broad shoulders rigid with some internal struggle. In the candlelight, his face looked haunted. "Your Grace?" A servant approached cautiously with a fresh goblet of wine. "Leave me," the Duke commanded, his voice hoarse. His hands gripped the window ledge as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Anna's heart ached as she watched him. Everyone knew the story, how his only son had died of fever 3 years past, barely older than little Hans. The boy's death had transformed their master from a stern but fair ruler into a cold, distant figure who buried his grief in rigid protocol and harsh judgment. Until tonight, when 2 hungry children had shattered his carefully maintained facade. As Anna turned away from the withdrawing room, a flash of deep purple silk caught her eye. The Countess von Hohenberg glided through the shadows of the corridor, her perfect features arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. 2 of her closest allies followed in her wake, minor nobles who owed their positions to her influence. "Such a unfortunate display," the Countess murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Our dear Duke, reduced to tears before the entire court, and over common peasant children, no less. "Most unseemly," agreed one of her companions. "It shows a dangerous softening of resolve." Indeed. The Countess's painted lips curved in a smile that made Anna shiver. "These tears shall be his undoing. The nobility cannot respect a leader who weeps like a woman over every hungry beggar who crosses his path." "What do you suggest, my lady?" "Patience," the Countess purred. "Sometimes the gentlest push is all that's needed to topple a weakened tower." She paused, noticing Anna trying to slip past with her empty trenchers. "You there, girl, what are you about?" Anna dropped into a quick curtsy. "Just attending to my duties, my lady." The Countess's sharp eyes studied her for a long moment. "See that you keep to them, then, and remember that servants who listen at doors often come to unfortunate ends." "Yes, my lady." Anna hurried away, her heart pounding. The Countess's cold voice followed her down the corridor. "Now then, my dears, let us discuss how best to support our beloved Duke in this difficult time." Back in the great hall, the feast was beginning to break up. Noble guests made their excuses and departed in small groups, their jewels glinting in the candlelight as they whispered behind their hands. The musicians packed away their instruments while servants began clearing the tables. Hans and Liesel sat quietly at their small table, their eyes heavy with exhaustion now that their hunger was satisfied. The little girl's head drooped against her brother's shoulder as he stroked her hair protectively. The Duke returned to the hall, His face composed once more, though something new lingered in his expression as he looked at the children. "You will stay the night," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Guards, escort them to the blue guest chamber. See that they are comfortable and post a watch at the door." Anna watched from the shadows as 2 guards gently helped the children to their feet. Little Liesel stumbled, barely awake, and to everyone's surprise, the Duke himself stepped forward to lift her into his arms. The girl instinctively curled against his broad chest, reminding Anna painfully of how he used to carry his own child. Hans followed, casting uncertain glances between his sister and the guards. The small procession made its way toward the guest wing, the Duke carrying Liesel as carefully as if she were made of glass. From across the hall, the Countess watched them go. Her perfect features were arranged in an expression of sympathy, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She tapped her painted fan thoughtfully against her palm, already plotting how best to use this night's events to her advantage. Anna shivered, remembering the Countess's words about toppling weakened towers. As she gathered the last of the plates from the children's table, she whispered a prayer for their safety, and for the Duke's heart, so recently awakened from its long winter of grief. The great hall slowly emptied, leaving only servants to clear away the remnants of the feast. Candles guttered in their holders, casting long shadows across the floor where only hours before, 2 hungry children had changed everything with their simple plea for bread. The first pale light of dawn crept through the castle windows as Anna rose from her small cot in the servants' quarters. Her muscles ached from yesterday's long hours at the feast, but duty called. The kitchen never slept, and morning brought its own demands. She splashed cold water on her face from the wash basin, tied on a fresh apron, and hurried down the narrow stairs to the kitchen. Already the huge hearth blazed with fresh-laid fires, warming the chilly stone walls. "There you are, girl," Greta called, looking up from where she stirred a massive pot of porridge. "The livestock won't feed themselves. And mind you check on those 2 little ones before you start your regular duties." "Yes, Greta." Anna gathered her skirts and headed for the castle yard. The morning air bit sharp and clean, heavy with dew. In the stables, horses nickered softly as she distributed hay and grain. The castle's chickens pecked eagerly at the feed she scattered, their clucks echoing in the quiet dawn. As she worked, her mind wandered to Hans and Liesel, sleeping in the blue guest chamber far above the servants' quarters. Such a grand room for 2 peasant children. She prayed they hadn't been too frightened to sleep. The sound of boots on cobblestones made her turn. Steward Matthias strode across the yard, his usual precise manner somewhat ruffled this early hour. "Girl, where is the kitchen matron?" "In the kitchen, sir, preparing breakfast porridge. Tell her to send up a proper meal for the children, nothing too rich, mind you, but nourishing." His Grace's orders. The steward tugged at his coat. "The Duke requires my presence immediately. He's been up since before dawn. Most unusual." Anna hurried back to relay the message to Greta, who was already ladling porridge into bowls for the servants' breakfast. The older woman's eyes widened at the news. His Grace, awake at this hour? Whatever next? But she immediately began adding honey and dried fruits to a fresh batch of porridge. "Here, take this up to those poor mites. And mind you, make sure they eat slowly. Too much rich food too fast will only make them sick." Anna carried the laden tray carefully up the servants' stairs. As she approached the blue guest chamber, she heard voices within, the Duke's commanding tones mixed with Steward Matthias's measured responses. "Must be properly clothed," the Duke was saying. "Send for the seamstress, and they are to remain within the castle walls where they'll be safe and warm." "Yes, Your Grace. Though if I may suggest, the Countess von Hohenberg may take exception to. The Countess's opinions do not concern me." The Duke's voice held an edge of steel. "These children are under my protection now. See to it." "Of course, Your Grace." The steward's voice softened slightly. "Shall I arrange for a tutor as well?" A pause. "Yes, but nothing too taxing at first. They need to regain their strength." The door opened suddenly, and Anna found herself face to face with the Duke. She dropped into a deep curtsy, careful not to spill the breakfast tray. "Your Grace, I've brought breakfast for the children." The Duke studied her for a long moment, his stern features unreadable. You're the kitchen maid who served them last night." "Yes, Your Grace." He nodded slowly. "Good. You seem to have a way with them. You will oversee their daily care, in addition to your regular duties." Anna's heart leaped, though she kept her eyes lowered. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'll do my best to serve them well." "See that you do." He swept past her, the steward hurrying in his wake. Inside the chamber, Hans and Liesel were already awake, huddled together on the massive four-poster bed. Their eyes lit up when they saw Anna. "Miss Anna!" Liesel scrambled down from the bed and ran to hug her skirts. Hans followed more slowly, trying to maintain his dignity but clearly relieved to see a familiar face. "Good morning, little ones." Anna set down the tray and hugged them both. "Did you sleep well in this grand room?" "The bed is so soft," Liesel marveled. "Like sleeping on clouds." "The guard outside snores," Hans confided with a small grin. Anna laughed and helped them settle at the small table by the window. Sunlight streamed through the leaded glass, making patterns on the rich carpet. "Before we eat, we must give thanks for God's blessings," she said gently. The children watched solemnly as she folded her hands and bowed her head. "Dear Lord, we thank you for this food, for shelter and safety, and for the Duke's kindness. Please bless this meal to our bodies and our souls to your service. Amen." "Amen," the children echoed. Anna showed them how to eat slowly, taking small bites and chewing well. She told them simple stories as they ate, keeping them entertained and distracted from wolfing down the food too quickly. Unknown to her, the Duke had paused in the corridor outside, arrested by the sound of her clear voice leading the children in prayer. He stood in the shadows, watching through the partially open door as she gently guided their small hands to hold the spoons properly, praised their manners, and wiped Liesel's chin when honey dripped. Something in his chest tightened at the tableau, the morning sun turning Anna's simple brown hair to gold, the children's faces glowing with trust as they looked up at her. It reminded him painfully of his late wife teaching their son his first prayers, before illness took them both. A servant hurried up, breaking the moment. "Your Grace, the Countess von Hohenberg's messenger demands immediate audience. He says it's most urgent." The Duke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. I will receive him in my study." The messenger, a nervous young man in the Countess's livery, bowed repeatedly as he delivered his mistress's message. The Countess was deeply concerned, he said, about the precedent being set by showing such extraordinary mercy to common peasants. It could undermine the natural order, encourage more beggars to impose upon noble generosity, even lead to unrest among the lower classes who might forget their proper place. The Duke listened with growing weariness as the messenger continued. The Countess humbly suggested that while Christian charity was admirable, perhaps the children could be sent to a church orphanage where they would receive care more suitable to their station. "Enough." The Duke's quiet word cut through the messenger's rehearsed speech. "Tell your mistress that I thank her for her concern. The children will remain here, under my protection. That is all." "But Your Grace," the Countess insisted. "That is all." Steel entered his voice. The messenger bowed hastily and backed out of the study. Alone, the Duke rubbed his temples where a headache was forming. The Countess would not give up so easily, he knew. She had too much influence among the local nobility, too many allies who owed her favors or feared her sharp tongue. He could already sense the whispers spreading through his court, whispers of weakness, of a ruler grown soft and sentimental in his grief. Yet when he thought of those children's faces, so thin and hopeful as they knelt before him last night, no, he could not send them away. Something long frozen within him had cracked open at the sight of their hunger, their courage in approaching his table. For the first time since losing his family, he felt truly alive again, and that feeling, painful as it was, seemed like a gift from God that he dared not reject. The day passed in a blur of duties, meetings with his steward, reviewing accounts, hearing petitions from local farmers about boundary disputes. Through it all, his thoughts kept returning to the children. Had the seamstress measured them yet? Were they comfortable? Had they eaten enough at midday? As evening approached, he found himself walking past the blue guest chamber again. The door stood slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the corridor. Anna's voice drifted out, soft and gentle. "There now, all tucked in nice and warm. Shall we say our prayers?" "Yes, please," came Liesel's sleepy reply. Hans mumbled something too quiet to hear. The Duke moved closer to the door, drawn by some impulse he couldn't name. In the lamplight, he could see Anna kneeling beside the great bed where both children lay, their hands folded on top of the covers. "Dear Lord," Anna prayed, her face upturned and serene. "Thank you for this day and all its blessings. Thank you for warm beds and full bellies, for kind hearts and helping hands. Please watch over these precious children through the night. Shield them from all harm and keep them safe in your love. And please bless the Duke for his mercy and help us all to show such kindness to those in need. Amen." "Amen," the children whispered. Anna kissed each small forehead before rising to bank the fire for the night. The Duke stood frozen in the shadows, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. The simple faith in Anna's prayer, the gentle way she tended to the children, the quiet peace that seemed to fill the chamber. It touched something he had thought long dead within him. He watched as she tucked the blankets more securely around their sleeping forms, humming softly under her breath. In the lamplight, her plain features were transformed by an inner radiance that made his breath catch. Before she could turn and discover him there, he withdrew silently into the darkness of the corridor. But the warmth in his chest remained, and for the first time in years he felt the faintest stirring of hope. The Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, with early autumn sunlight gilding the castle's weathered stones. Anna helped Liesel smooth her new dress, a simple but well-made garment in dark blue wool, while Hans fidgeted with the collar of his shirt. "Must we go?" Hans asked, tugging at the unfamiliar fabric. "Everyone will stare." "Yes, little one. We must give thanks to God for his blessings," Anna replied gently, straightening his collar. "And you both look very proper now, thanks to the Duke's kindness." The walk to the castle chapel was short, but Anna's heart beat faster with each step. She could feel eyes following them, servants, guards, visiting nobles, all turning to watch as she led the children through the courtyard. The Countess von Hohenberg's silk skirts rustled as she swept past them, her painted lips curved in a cold smile. Inside the chapel, the usual strict hierarchy prevailed. Noble families occupied the elevated galleries and front pews, while servants and villagers filled the lower benches toward the back. Anna hesitated, uncertain where to place the children who were neither noble nor common servants. A discreet cough from Steward Matthias caught her attention. He gestured subtly to a middle row, neither too far forward nor too far back. Anna guided the children there, trying to ignore the whispers that followed them. Peasant brats. Above their station, the Duke's charity gone too far. Liesel pressed closer to Anna's side, while Hans lifted his chin defiantly. Before the whispers could grow louder, the chapel bell tolled and the Duke entered. Everyone rose, heads bowing as he took his place in the ducal pew. Anna noticed his gaze sweep briefly over the children before fixing forward as the priest began the service. The familiar Latin prayers washed over them, but Anna found it hard to concentrate. She could feel the weight of stares from both above and below, the nobles' disapproval from their galleries, the villagers' curiosity from the back pews. She focused on helping the children follow along in the prayer book, teaching them to make the sign of the cross at the proper moments. When the time came for Holy Communion, another moment of uncertainty arose. Anna guided the children to join the line of supplicants, positioning them carefully behind the nobles but ahead of the common folk. She saw the priest's eyebrows rise slightly, but he gave them the sacrament without comment. As they filed out after the service, Anna heard the Countess's voice carry clearly across the courtyard. "Such presumption! In my day, peasant children knew their place, in the back of the chapel with the rest of their kind." Anna hurried the children along, but not before seeing the Duke's shoulders stiffen as he too heard the remark. To her surprise, instead of returning directly to the castle, he gestured for Steward Matthias to approach. "Fetch the granary keys," he commanded. "I would inspect the stores before the midday meal." His eyes met Anna's. "You will accompany us, Mistress Mueller. I would have your counsel." Anna's heart jumped. "Your Grace?" she stammered. But the Duke had already turned away, leaving her to hurry after him with the steward. The walk to the granaries took them through the castle's lower bailey and past the outer walls. Anna was acutely aware of the unusual picture they must present: the Duke in his fine coat, the steward with his ring of keys, and herself in her plain dress, trailing behind like a shadow. Inside the first granary, the Duke surveyed the towering sacks of grain with a critical eye. "How do our stores compare to previous years?" he asked the steward. "Well enough, Your Grace. The harvest was fair, though not exceptional. With careful management, we should see the household through winter with some to spare." The Duke nodded slowly, then turned to Anna. "And what of the village? How fare the common folk?" Anna swallowed hard, surprised to be addressed directly. "If Your Grace permits, many families struggle. The summer was dry, and some crops failed. There are children as hungry as Hans and Liesel were." "Indeed." The Duke's expression grew thoughtful. "And what would you suggest?" Anna gathered her courage. "The church teachings speak of feeding the hungry, Your Grace. Perhaps some portion of the stores might be distributed? Not as charity, but as loans against next year's harvest?" She held her breath, expecting rebuke for such boldness. But the Duke merely nodded again, turning to the steward. "Make it so. Open the granary on market days. Record what each family takes, but—" His eyes met Anna's briefly. "Be generous in the accounting." The steward bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." They continued their inspection through the power-vaxed. Other granaries, the Duke occasionally asking Anna's opinion about practical matters: how best to distribute the grain, which families were most in need, how to ensure fair treatment. Each time, she answered carefully but honestly, marveling at this unexpected attention. The Duke's manner remained formal, yet there was something different in how he listened to her responses, considering them with real attention rather than mere courtesy. Anna found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, the way his stern features softened slightly when speaking of the village children, how his hands sometimes made abrupt gestures, as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. When they finished the inspection, the Duke dismissed them with his usual brisk nod. But as Anna turned to leave, he spoke again. "You have a practical wisdom, Mistress Mueller. It does you credit." She curtsied deeply, cheeks flushing. "Your Grace is too kind." Later that night, in her narrow attic room beneath the eaves, Anna lay awake despite her exhaustion. The day's events tumbled through her mind. The whispers in the chapel, the Duke's unexpected attention, the Countess's cold eyes following her every move. A mouse skittered across the floorboards, making her start. In the darkness, her fears seemed to grow larger, more menacing. The Countess was not one to ignore any threat to her influence, no matter how small. And Anna's growing visibility in the household, her conversations with the Duke, the children's elevated status, all of these marked her as a target. "You're being noticed too much," she whispered to herself, pulling her thin blanket closer. A kitchen maid should be invisible, silent, safe in the shadows. Another mouse rustled in the corner. Anna turned onto her side, trying to find a comfortable position on the lumpy straw mattress. But sleep remained elusive, as her mind spun with worry. The Countess's whispers would not stay whispers forever. Soon they would become accusations, schemes, perhaps even open attacks. Anna had seen it before, how the noblewoman could destroy those who displeased her with a few well-placed words, a rumor here, an innuendo there. What would happen to the children then? To her position in the household? To the Duke's newfound willingness to help the village poor? The night grew deeper, marked by the distant calling of owls and the eternal rustling of mice in the walls. Anna lay wakeful, her prayers becoming pleas for protection against the storms she could feel gathering on the horizon. The Duke's library smelled of leather and wood smoke as Anna entered. He stood by the hearth, his tall frame outlined by dancing flames. "Sit, please," he gestured to a nearby chair. "I wish to discuss the children's future." Anna perched carefully on the edge, hands folded in her lap. "They are recovering well, Your Grace." "Indeed." His voice softened. They remind me of my Thomas. He would have been 10 this year. Anna's heart ached at the raw pain in his words. Loss leaves deep wounds, Your Grace, but faith can help heal them. Faith? A bitter smile crossed his face. I lost that too when I lost him. Yet you showed mercy to Hans and Liesel, Anna said gently. Later that evening, Anna taught the children a simple hymn in the servants' quarters. The Duke's deep voice joined unexpectedly from the doorway, trembling with emotion. Servants froze, wide-eyed at this unprecedented behavior. In his chambers that night, the Duke gazed at his son's portrait, remembering Anna's words about healing through faith and mercy. Something long buried stirred in his heart. The great hall blazed once more with candlelight as nobles gathered for the Duke's banquet. But this feast held a surprise. The Duke rose from his chair, commanding attention. From this day forward, he declared, we establish a charitable fund for orphans. And tonight, we shall distribute bread to all who hunger at our gates. Whispers rippled through the assembly. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, but none dared object. Outside, cheers rose from the gathering poor. Anna directed the distribution with quiet efficiency, her heart light as she watched even the most prideful nobles forced to hand crusty loaves to peasant children. The Duke moved among them all, smiling with genuine warmth that transformed his stern face. Later, in the chapel's hushed silence, Anna found the Duke kneeling in prayer. Their eyes met in the candlelight, words of tender feeling rising to their lips until the chapel door creaked. The Countess glided in, her face a mask of devotion while her eyes glittered with malice. The next morning brought storm clouds and treachery. The Countess swept into the council chamber, her silk skirts rustling as she produced yellowed papers with a flourish. Your Grace, I have discovered a terrible deception, she announced, her voice dripping with false concern. The documents she presented claimed the children were part of a beggar's scheme, coached by Anna to prey upon the Duke's mercy. This kitchen maid has played upon your kindness, the Countess declared, using these little actors to gain favor. The Duke's face turned ashen as he studied the papers. Around him, council members muttered darkly about servants overstepping their place. When Anna was brought before them, she stood proud despite her terror. Remove this schemer from the castle, the Countess commanded. Guards seized Anna's arms as the children's screams echoed through the halls. The Duke remained frozen, his hands clenched, watching as she was dragged away. That evening, Anna walked slowly through the village, her few possessions bundled under her arm. Cold rain soaked her dress as she watched the children being led to the workhouse. Lifting her face to the weeping sky, she whispered a desperate prayer for divine intervention. Anna huddled in Widow Meyer's tiny cottage as rain drummed against the thatch roof. The old woman shared what little she had. Hard bread crusts softened in thin broth. You've always been kind to us, poor folk, the widow said, patting Anna's hand. Let me help you now. The next morning, Anna joined the widow gathering firewood in the forest. As she bent to collect fallen branches, something caught her eye. A familiar scrap of cloth poking from a hollow log. Her heart leaped. It was the children's leather pouch, hidden there during their laundry duties. With trembling fingers, Anna untied the worn strings. Inside lay a carefully folded letter, the paper creased but intact. Reading it by the morning light, tears filled her eyes. It was proof of their father's service in the Duke's own regiment, signed with his seal. Hope blazed in her heart. This could save them all. At first light the next day, wrapped in the widow's old wool cloak, Anna started down the muddy cart track toward the castle. She held the precious letter close, each step bringing her closer to redemption or ruin. The great hall hummed with tension as nobles filled the carved wooden benches. Afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, catching the sparkle of jewels and gilt thread on fine garments. Peasants crowded the gallery above, their rough clothes a stark contrast to the sea of silk below. The Countess von Hohenberg stood before the assembly, her voice ringing with false concern. Your Grace's recent softness toward common folk undermines the very foundation of noble authority. For the good of all, Perhaps stewardship should pass to firmer hands. Murmurs rippled through the hall. The Duke sat rigid on his chair of state, shadows beneath his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Father Benedict watched from his place near the altar, fingers moving in silent prayer. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open. Anna Mueller strode down the central aisle, her borrowed cloak damp from the journey, but her head held high. Gasps echoed as guards moved to stop her. "Your Grace!" Her clear voice carried to every corner. "I bring truth that cannot wait." The Duke raised his hand, stilling the guards. "Speak then," Anna approached, withdrawing the letter with trembling fingers. "These children are no impostors, but the offspring of your own loyal soldier." Taking the worn paper, the Duke's hands shook as he read aloud. The soldier's words spoke of faithful service, of mortal wounds taken in battle, of his dying plea for his children's care. The ducal seal below removed all doubt. The Countess's face drained of color. "Impossible," she whispered. But her scheme lay in ruins. Peasants cheered from above, while nobles shifted uneasily in their seats. The Duke rose slowly, his expression transformed by purpose. He took Anna's work-roughened hand in his own aristocratic one, facing the assembled court. "Look well," he declared, his voice strong with conviction. "True nobility dwells not in birth alone, but in mercy, courage, and truth. This woman has taught me this." He turned to Anna, his eyes soft. "If she will accept, I would have her teach us all." A hush fell over the hall. Hundreds of eyes fixed upon the kitchen maid as they waited for her answer. The chapel bells rang out across the estate, their deep tones echoing through stone corridors as Duke Leopold led Anna toward the altar. Hans and Liesel walked beside them, their faces glowing with joy, wearing new clothes that marked their rise from peasant rags to ducal wards. Candlelight danced on the chapel walls, and incense sweetened the air. Before the assembled court, the Duke's voice carried clear and strong. "These children, born of a soldier's sacrifice, shall be wards of House Falkenrath, raised with all privilege and care due their father's loyalty." He squeezed their small hands, then turned to Anna. "And this woman, whose courage taught me to see with my heart, I intend to make my wife." Father Benedict stepped forward, his weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "The banns shall be read these next 3 Sundays, as is proper. Let all witness this declaration of intent." The nobles, gathered in their finery, bowed deeply. Even those who had sneered at Anna's common birth found themselves moved by the scene before them. The Duke's stern face softened with tenderness, the children's eyes bright with hope, and Anna's quiet dignity that outshone any silk or jewels. As evening settled over the castle, the family gathered in the children's new chamber. A cheerful fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over tapestried walls. Hans and Liesel knelt beside their bed in their nightclothes, hands clasped in prayer. Anna knelt with them, her simple dress pooling around her. The Duke joined them, lowering himself to his knees without concern for his fine clothes. He took Anna's hand in his, the touch full of promise. "Never again," he whispered, "will I let fear of what others think silence the voice of mercy in my heart." Together they prayed, their voices mingling in the fire-lit chamber, the Duke's deep tones, Anna's gentle murmur, and the children's clear young voices. They were no longer separate souls divided by rank and circumstance, but a family bound by love, faith, and the courage to choose what was right over what was expected. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.